Welcome to the Mindcut series. Today we're diving deep into something really fundamental. This intricate dance between our genes, the world around us, and, well, the choices we make.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area. And it's all sparked, as always, by your curiosity, the questions you send in.
Exactly. We've got a rich set of material today drawing on insights from a leading expert in human genetics and epigenetics.
Mm-hmm. Our mission, if you like, is to unpack how much of what we maybe thought was fixed, set in stone in our DNA is actually, well, surprisingly adaptable.
It turns out it can be influenced quite a bit by our behavior, our environment.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Prepare for some real aha moments, I think. We'll be digging into some surprising facts.
Like the origin of blue eyes. I heard that's an interesting story.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one. And also looking at these incredible human adaptations for thriving in some really extreme environments.
Okay, so let's start with that classic question, the one everyone knows. Nature versus nurture. How much of who we are is really down to our genes versus our experiences?
Right, the age-old debate. And what's so captivating now is that, well, current understanding shows gene expression is far more dynamic than we ever really imagined.
More flexible.
Much more. The whole field of epigenetics is revealing these subtle but really powerful ways our environment and our actions can actually modify how our genes work.
So not changing the genes themselves, but how they're used.
Exactly. Think of your DNA like the computer's hardware. Epigenetics. That's more like the software telling the hardware which programs to run, how often, that sort of thing.
Okay, so it's not rewriting the basic code, but it's definitely influencing the output.
Precisely.
Oh, yeah.
So while some traits might seem fixed at birth, like your initial eye color,
Yeah.
even those can have nuances. They can be influenced by the environment. Like you mentioned, sunlight potentially darkening eyes over time.
Right, I've heard about that. So even eye color isn't totally static.
Not entirely. And if you zoom out, you see this broader principle of selection at work. Behaviors driven by necessity over generations can actually lead to changes in gene expression becoming more common.
Okay, speaking of eyes, let's get into that. You said the origin story for blue eyes was remarkable.
It really is. What's fascinating is that basically every single person with blue eyes today can trace their ancestry back to one single individual.
Get out. One person.
One person. At some point, way back, a specific genetic mutation happened in just one human, and boom, blue eyes appeared for the very first time.
That blows my mind. So one single genetic event, and now look how many people have blue eyes. It really shows how these small shifts can spread.
It does. And then that trait, for whatever reason, maybe it was just striking, maybe it conferred some subtle advantage we don't fully understand, or maybe it was just luck it spread.
Incredible. So one origin for blue. What about green eyes? I hear they're rarer.
Yeah, green eyes are generally less common. And unlike blue eyes, it seems green eyes might have had multiple origins, different genetic variations popping up in different people at different times.
Huh. So not just one single starting point like blue. Brown eyes were the original, right?
That's the prevailing theory, yes.
Yeah.
Brown was likely the ancestral eye color.
Okay, so multiple starts for green, one for blue. Amazing. Now back to the environment thing. I mentioned sunlight darkening eyes. That's a real effect.
It seems to be, yes. Exposure to UV radiation can stimulate melanin production in the iris, potentially leading to a gradual darkening over time, especially from infancy.
So even something we think of as fixed, like eye color, has this kind of dynamic interaction going on. You're not necessarily stuck with the exact shade you were born with.
Exactly. It highlights that things aren't always as set as they seem.
Okay, so it's clear our genes aren't just this static blueprint. What about changes happening even faster? How quickly can gene expression adapt?
Well, on a very short time scale, gene expression is constantly shifting, responding to environmental cues in minutes to hours. Think about stress or exercise or what you just ate.
Right, immediate responses. But what about longer-term changes that stick around, maybe even get passed on?
That's where epigenetic modifications come back in. These aren't changes to the DNA sequence itself, remember, but these chemical tags on the DNA that affect gene activity.
And these tags, they can be inherited? That seems huge. Like the effects of trauma, for example.
Exactly. There's growing evidence suggesting experiences like severe trauma or, say, starvation can leave epigenetic marks that might be passed down across generations.
Wow. So the experiences of your grandparents could, in theory, leave a subtle biological echo in you.
Potentially, yes. Studies on populations that went through famine, for instance, have shown heritable epigenetic changes related to metabolism. It's quite sobering to think about historical events having such a long biological shadow.
But are those inherited changes always good? Like, does inheriting a famine response metabolism help if you live somewhere with plenty of food?
That's a crucial point. No, not necessarily beneficial. An adaptation for scarcity might actually become detrimental in an environment of abundance, potentially contributing to things like obesity or diabetes. It's context dependent.
Makes sense. And then there's the traditional view of evolution, genetic mutations, variations accumulating over thousands of years. Is that time frame changing too?
Our understanding is definitely evolving. While major species-level changes take vast amounts of time, evidence suggests significant adaptations within human populations, driven by selection on existing or newly introduced variation, can potentially happen much faster. Maybe within 1,000 years, or even less in some cases.
Faster than we used to think. Okay, this might seem like a jump, but it relates to genetics and selection. I remember learning about hybrid vigor, mice choosing mates with different immune systems.
Ah, yes, the major histocompatibility complex, or MHC. That research is fascinating. Mice do show a preference, often based on smell, for mates with dissimilar MHC genes. The idea is, yes, this leads to offspring with a more diverse immune toolkit, better able to fight off pathogens.
So is that true for humans too? Do we subconsciously sniff out immune system compatibility?
It looks like it. There have been studies like the famous T-shirt study, where people rated the smell of worn shirts. They tended to prefer the scent of individuals whose MHC genes were significantly different from their own.
That's wild. So attraction, or at least part of it, could literally be down to smelling out good genes for potential kids' immune system.
It suggests smell plays this really profound, often subconscious role in mate selection, potentially guiding us toward genetic diversity for offspring resilience.
Mind blown. Okay, so think about today's world, globalization. People moving, meeting, having families across ancestrally distinct populations like never before. What does that mean for our gene pool?
Well, it means we're creating novel genetic combinations on a massive scale. This increased intermingling can definitely boost overall genetic diversity, which can be protective.
More resilience, maybe?
Potentially. But it could also bring together rare recessive variants that were previously isolated, maybe leading to new or increased vulnerability in some cases. It's complex.
You see it reflected culturally too, don't you?
Yeah.
Interracial relationships are much more visible now than they were decades ago.
Absolutely, reflecting those demographic shifts. And it underscores why diversity is generally beneficial biologically. Think about the opposite, the near universal taboo against incest.
Right. Even before genetics, people knew it wasn't a good idea.
Exactly. Because reproduction between close relatives dramatically increases the chance of offspring inheriting two copies of the same harmful recessive gene. That's the biological punishment, so to speak. Genetic diversity helps mask or dilute those harmful variants.
It's incredible how these deep biological forces shape our behavior, our preferences, like attraction to certain smells, even our cultural norms. So with all this mixing, are humans still, actively evolving?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Evolution isn't something that just stopped. As long as there are factors influencing who reproduces successfully and passes on their genes, evolution is happening.
And this mixing of populations is actually speeding things up, potentially, by introducing new variations.
It can be a powerful engine for adaptation, yes. A great example is the Tibetan high-altitude adaptation.
Right. They live comfortably at altitudes that would make most of us seriously ill. How did that happen?
What's amazing is that the key gene variant allowing them to thrive in low oxygen seems to have been acquired through interbreeding with Denisovans, another ancient human group.
They borrowed a gene from Denisovans.
Essentially, yes. Through interbreeding events long ago, that advantageous Denisovan gene variant entered the Homo sapiens gene pool in that region. Then, as people settled the Tibetan plateau, natural selection strongly favored individuals carrying it.
So Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, we weren't always neatly separated species. There was interbreeding.
There was definitely interbreeding.
Right.
We find traces of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA in modern human populations, especially outside of Africa. Their genes were introgressed into our lineage.
Wow. We've even found remains of first-generation hybrids, right? Someone who had, say, a Neanderthal parent and a Homo sapiens parent.
Yes, direct evidence like that has been found. It confirms these weren't just theoretical possibilities, they actually happened.
It totally messes with that old March of Progress image of evolution, that straight line leading up to us.
Exactly. That image is misleading. Evolution isn't a ladder towards perfection. It's about being the best fit for a specific environment at a specific time. There's no ultimate goal.
And beneficial changes can take a long time to arise and spread, right? Someone once told me it takes ages to evolve a good trait, but losing one can happen fast.
That's a really important point. Most random mutations are neutral or harmful. Truly beneficial ones are rare. And even when they occur, it takes time for selection to increase their frequency. Deleterious mutations, on the other hand, can have immediate negative impacts, often preventing development altogether.
But you mentioned sometimes existing variation can become advantageous quickly if the environment or behavior changes, like with breath hold diving. Tell us about these real-life X-Men you've studied.
Right. Okay, so one group I worked with are the Bajau people in Indonesia. They're often called sea nomads. Traditionally, many live their entire lives on houseboats, getting everything from the sea.
And they do this by diving, like serious diving.
Unbelievable breath hold diving. It's central to their traditional way of life, fishing, gathering shellfish, sea cucumbers, even valuable black coral from significant depths.
I've heard crazy numbers about their breath hold times, like 13 minutes. Is that real?
That's the figure I heard repeated many times. While I didn't personally time anyone for that long, their abilities are clearly extraordinary. And it's not static diving. They're actively hunting underwater.
Moving around, using spear guns.
Exactly. They descend, sometimes walk on the seafloor at depths where they're negatively buoyant, looking for fish. It's incredibly skillful.
And they start young.
Incredibly young. Many Bajau kids learn to swim before they walk, spending so much time in and around the water. I remember one diver had the softest feet because he was rarely on land. No calluses.
Wow. So studying them, you started thinking about evolution.
Yes, because freediving is inherently risky. If your survival and ability to provide for your family depends on diving well, there's intense selective pressure. Poor divers are less likely to survive, less likely to reproduce successfully.
So natural selection in action. Those with traits making them better, safer divers would pass those traits on.
That was the hypothesis. We see the risks even in controlled competitive diving blackouts are common. Imagine that happening alone in the ocean.
Definitely a strong pressure. Okay, standard safety warning here. Please, nobody try pushing breath hold limits without expert training and supervision. It's dangerous. So what physiological adaptations did you find in the Bajau?
Well, we looked at the mammalian dive reflex. That's the thing that kicks in when you hold your breath and put your face in cold water.
Heart rate slows down, blood flow changes.
Right. Heart slows, blood vessels in your limbs constrict to save oxygen for the brain and heart, and crucially, your spleen contracts.
The spleen contracts. Why?
The spleen acts like a little scuba tank. It stores oxygen-rich red blood cells. When the dive reflex triggers, it squeezes those extra red blood cells into circulation.
Giving you an oxygen boost? How much?
In most people, it's estimated around a 10% boost, which is actually quite significant when you're holding your breath.
10%? That's amazing. Athletes try all sorts of things for tiny gains, and we have this built-in 10% boost. I had no idea the spleen did that.
It's pretty cool. Triggered by that cold water on the face via the vagal nerve, and it's temporary. Once you breathe again, the spleen takes those cells back.
A reusable oxygen tank. Does the spleen do other things?
Oh yeah, it's important for the immune system too. And it's got a lot of nerves, which is interesting, though we think the contraction is unconscious. It also contracts a bit during exercise, which might explain why animals built for speed or diving, like horses or seals, often have relatively larger spleens.
So this dive reflex, it's in lots of mammals, even mice.
Yep. It seems to be a very ancient reflex, probably dating back to early mammalian ancestors who spent time in the water.
Fascinating. What about babies? I've seen videos where newborns seem totally at home underwater.
There does seem to be an innate reflex in infants. They naturally hold their breath when submerged. I even heard stories, though unconfirmed, of Bajau testing babies' breath hold ability early on.
Wow. Okay, so back to the Bajau divers. What did you find specifically about their spleens?
This was the key finding. The Bajau, as a population, have significantly larger spleens than nearby non-diving neighbors. About 50% larger on average.
50%? And that wasn't just in the active divers.
No, it was present in both divers and non-divers within the Bajau community. That strongly suggested a genetic component, not just an effective training.
So it's likely an evolved trait in the population. Did you find a specific gene?
We did find evidence of selection acting on a gene linked to thyroid hormone levels. The Bajau variant is associated with slightly higher thyroid hormone.
Thyroid hormone, how does that connect to diving or spleens?
Well, interestingly, that same genetic variant is also linked to larger spleen size in other populations, like Europeans. The hypothesis is that slightly higher thyroid hormone even within the normal range, might boost red blood cell production.
Which could lead to needing a larger storage tank, the spleen, and provide more oxygen overall.
That's the thinking. It's a potential mechanism for increasing oxygen carrying capacity that's different from the usual EPO pathway.
Very cool. Any link to immune function, given the spleen's role there?
It's a great question, but not something studied directly yet, as far as I know. Anecdotally, many older divers seem remarkably healthy. That also makes you wonder if other coastal populations might carry similar adaptations, even if less pronounced. Or maybe even populations near rivers who dived historically. Our connection to water might be deeper than we think.
It certainly challenges the image of humans as purely land-based creatures.
Now, the Bajau aren't the only amazing divers you studied. Tell us about the Haenyeo in Korea.
The Haenyeo. Yes, incredible group. These are predominantly elderly women, average age around 70, on Jeju Island, Korea. Their diving tradition is ancient, possibly thousands of years old.
70 years old and still diving.
Oh, yes. And historically, they did it in very cold water with minimal gear, maybe just cotton suits. What's particularly striking is that they traditionally dive throughout pregnancy.
And diving while pregnant in cold water, that sounds unbelievably demanding. That must be intense selective pressure. Extremely intense. It really suggests strong selection for adaptations related to cold tolerance, breath holding, and cardiovascular responses, especially during pregnancy.
How deep do they go?
The ones we tracked recently, mostly older women, were typically diving to around 10 meters, maybe 30 feet. Historically, younger divers likely went deeper. But even 30 feet is impressive for women in their 70s or 80s, let alone while pregnant.
Absolutely. And anything impacting pregnancy, as you said, can drive rapid selection. Why is it women who do this diving?
The exact historical reasons aren't clear. My speculation is it might relate to physiological differences in cold tolerance, perhaps subcutaneous fat distribution. It's interesting that other cold water diving cultures also sometimes see women as the primary divers.
Are they respected in their culture? What do they gather?
Today, yes. Very much so. They're recognized by UNESCO. Historically, maybe less so. They gather valuable things like sea urchin, abalone, octopus, seaweed, high-value protein, and other resources. And they're known for being stewards of their marine environment with sustainable practices.
It really drives home how hard humans will work for protein and fat. Diet is such a huge evolutionary driver.
Definitely. Think about lactase persistence for digesting milk, or Inuit adaptations to high-fat diets. Diet shapes us profoundly.
So what specific adaptations did you find in the Haenyeo, particularly cardiovascular?
We saw two main types. First, a physiological training effect. Their heart rates slow down dramatically during dives, much more than untrained people. We saw drops of over 40 beats per minute in less than 15 seconds. Incredible cardiovascular control.
Wow. That must involve the vagus nerve, right? But much stronger than usual.
Exactly. A highly trained dive reflex. Second, we found a genetic adaptation. A variant linked to lower diastolic blood pressure during the dive.
Lower blood pressure while diving, why would that be good?
We think it might be protective, especially for pregnant divers. Diving involves intermittent apnea, holding your breath. This can sometimes cause blood pressure spikes, similar to sleep apnea. Lower diastolic pressure during these periods could protect against hypertensive disorders of pregnancy, like preeclampsia.
That's a fascinating link. Studying the Haenyeo could actually give us insights into conditions like preeclampsia in the general population.
Potentially, yes. Understanding how they've adapted to intermittent apnea during pregnancy could be very valuable. Preeclampsia is a serious condition and has likely been a strong selective force historically.
It connects back to selection. You mentioned earlier that many miscarriages might be nature selecting against non-viable mutations.
That's the understanding, yes.
Huh.
A high percentage of early miscarriages are thought to be due to chromosomal abnormalities or severe mutations that would prevent viable development. It's a kind of natural veto on genetic programs that won't work.
Okay, thinking about all these internal adaptations. Sometimes in genetics, you see weird external traits linked to internal changes, right? Like coat color in mice linking to something else entirely.
Yes, pleiotropy, where one gene influences multiple, seemingly unrelated traits.
Do the Bajau or Haenyeo have any distinctive external markers, besides the obvious environmental ones like soft feet or skin changes from sun and water, that might signal their unique physiology?
That's a really sharp question. Not that we've specifically identified or looked for in a systematic way.
Yeah.
But it's not impossible. Could there be subtle cues? Maybe.
Yeah.
It even raises the possibility, going back to mate selection, that maybe people unconsciously pick up on subtle external signs linked to beneficial internal adaptations.
Yeah, maybe there's more going on with attraction than we consciously perceive. Okay, let's zoom out again. Human super performance. Think elite marathon runners, often from specific regions like East Africa. Is that genetics, training, or both?
It's almost certainly both. There's evidence suggesting potential genetic advantages in things like bone structure, muscle fiber types, or altitude adaptation in certain populations. But genetics is just potential. You still need immense dedication, training, the right environment.
So having the genes doesn't guarantee success, but it might give you a higher ceiling or a better starting point.
Exactly. You can't dismiss the role of genetics just because training is also crucial. Someone might train incredibly hard, but still not reach the levels of someone with both the training and a genetic advantage.
Does this apply to cognitive abilities too? Math, creativity. We sometimes see exceptional skills in people with neurodiversity, like autism or Tourette's.
It's a really interesting but difficult area to study scientifically.
Yeah.
There are correlations, like maybe the hyperfocus associated with autism being advantageous in STEM fields, or maybe faster processing in some individuals with Tourette's. But quantifying traits like creativity and isolating genetic factors from environment and upbringing is incredibly complex.
Yeah, much harder than measuring spleen size or running speed. Relying on family history alone doesn't tell the whole story either.
Definitely not. Which brings us to a crucial point: avoiding genetic determinism.
The idea that our genes dictate everything and we have no control.
Right. That's a dangerous oversimplification. Mindset, belief, opportunity, environment, these things are incredibly powerful. There are even studies showing that just believing you have a genetic predisposition for athletic improvement can actually boost your performance gains from training.
Wow, the placebo effect for genetics.
Sort of. It highlights how much our beliefs about our potential can shape the outcome. We should be really wary of limiting ourselves or others based on perceived genetic limitations.
This whole conversation really underscores that. Today's deep dive has just been fascinating, revealing this incredible plasticity in our biology, how much our environment and choices can shape even our genes' expression.
It's quite amazing. From that single ancestor of all blue-eyed people to the incredible ways the Bajau and Hanyeo adapted to their environments. It shows life's remarkable ability to find ways to thrive.
This interplay between genes and experience, it's this constant dance, isn't it? Full of surprises, full of potential we're really only beginning to grasp.
Absolutely. So maybe the question for you listening is, how does understanding this plasticity empower you in thinking about your own health, your well-being, maybe even pushing past limits you thought were fixed? What new questions does it spark about human potential and where we might be headed?